Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So this happened at the border yesterday. Fox News reporting on this confrontation between Customs and Border Patrol officers and representatives, goons from a Mexican drug cartel.
Suspected cartel gunmen in Mexico fire shots at Border Patrol agents in Fronton, Texas. This all happened about 1 hour ago. Law enforcement tells Bill Malugin it happened as cartel members tried to bring a group of illegal immigrants across the river. The agents fired back. No one on either side was hit. The group of illegal immigrants did not make it across the Red River.
Boy, that's got to be very upsetting to Selena Gomez and J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson and
Pedro
all these
Martinez.
other sanctuary Pauls that whose position is, whether they want to own it or not, no one can be illegal, not even people that the Mexican drug cartels are trying to force feed into this country. The ERO Los Angeles office, Enforcement and Recovery Office in Los Angeles, arrested a foreign fugitive wanted by authorities in El Salvador for homicide, illicit association, and terrorist organizations. He is a non-citizen, and now his removal to his home country of El Salvador is pending. And yet this is what you get from politicians in these sanctuary states, like Illinois, like Minnesota. Here's your chief law enforcement of the state of Minnesota, Attorney General Keith Ellison.
It's not the job of local law enforcement to carry out the dictates of the Trump administration. In fact, they've tried this before when they were in power, and they lost just about all the time they were in court when they tried to coerce states into being their little deputies. So let me just say that I have no fear of the Trump administration, absolutely not. And we're going to devote the resources of our state to our state business, not immigration business. That's their business. We're going to do our business. And of course, we're not going to interfere with their business, but we're not going to do their bidding because it's not our job.
Right. It's not my job to advance the public safety interests of Minnesota residents. That's what Keith Ellison is saying. And that's what all these sanctuary politicians are saying. But they are trying to get away with saying that by demagoguing Trump because he's, bad orange man, and they think they can continue to essentially run cover for drug cartels and violent criminals by just saying we're standing up to Trump. I mean, if they get away with that, Trump victory notwithstanding, what a state of affairs we have in this country. Ron Vitiello, former U.S. Border Patrol Chief, Deputy Commissioner and Director of ICE. He is the only person to have led both components of the Department of Homeland Security, both ICE and CBP. Ron Vitiello, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me, Dan. Good to talk to you.
What's your reaction to AG Keith Ellison? He's not the only one that has that opinion, that he and his peeps in Minnesota are not going to be used as the little deputies, his phrase, for ICE or CBP.
Well, it's sad that elected officials like the Attorney General of Minnesota, who took an oath, presumably to the Constitution and the Constitution of Minnesota, to protect Minnesotans, and to have him flout federal law and pretend that he's smarter and better able to protect the citizens of that state. It's a sad commentary on where the left is. They want us to believe that coming into the country without being invited, crossing a border illegally, and staying in the country without being inspected is not a crime, when in fact it is a federal crime. It's a violation of the Administrative Code for Immigration, and it's also a federal felony. And so people like Keith Ellison are more interested in protecting criminals and people who come into the country illegally and commit crimes than they are protecting Minnesotans and the rest of America.
The confrontation that Fox reported you heard between goons from a Mexican cartel and Customs and Border Patrol agents yesterday, what is the state of affairs, to your best understanding, on the border with respect to the daily danger that Customs and Border Patrol agents face from organized criminal operations like those cartels?
Well, the cartels for the last 4 years have had the run of the place, if you will. They've controlled the southwest border more than any other entity under the Joe Biden administration. They took in record profits, smuggled record amounts of fentanyl and every other drug that they ply their trade in, human trafficking, the worst of the worst kinds of things they've done to people in the pipeline. That area that's being reported in Fronton, Texas, is a very dangerous area most of the time. Lots of drug smuggling occurs there, but there's usually kind of a stasis between authorities and drug smugglers. And so what's happening now is that under this historic political victory of the Trump administration is now turning into winning on the operational front, right? Because there's more resources applied to the problems at our border, more agents out on patrol, and these drug smugglers are no doubt feeling the pressure of what they haven't seen in the last 4 years. And so there will be this adjustment that people will have to make. And I'm very proud of the work that's being done in CBP and ICE to reestablish the rule of law as it relates to immigration enforcement, securing the border, and making the streets of America safer.
But how many of all the millions that have come across our border illegally, how many do you think are violent offenders? Because we had 1,700 arrested last week. I mean, this could take years to get just the violent offenders off the streets and back to their home countries, right?
Yes, it's a lot. It's a lot. Under the Biden administration, the government's own records say there are 11 million people that they've encountered, and many of them they let go into the United States. And what we know from, traditional operations at the southwest border, the Border Patrol doesn't see everybody that crosses the border. Law enforcement doesn't encounter everybody, even if they are released. And so lots of people, the president on the campaign said it was about 20 million people. He's probably not wrong about that. And even if a fraction of that 20 million are violent offenders or criminals, it puts every city and town in America at risk. And again, so I'm grateful that the administration is now moving out on smart immigration enforcement to remove these criminals from our cities and the streets of America, and applying resources, unprecedented military support to the men and women of the front line at CBP. And then we've all seen the deportation activities in some of the large cities, including Chicago, that are now underway.
Well, I mean, going back to Representative Anthony Gonzalez's release of internal data from the federal government back after the election. Actually, it was before the election because it informed the election. This is against the backdrop now of ICE trying to get to 1,500 arrests a day of those who pose a public safety threat. But I mean, the number was somewhere in the neighborhood of 650,000 people in this country illegally who either committed a violent crime and had been convicted, or were facing charges for a violent crime. This was sort of the universe of Tier 1, those who pose a public safety threat. So if that number is even close to accurate, 650,000. Even if you get to 1,500 a day, I mean, it shows you the scope of the problem.
And I would say that ICE and my colleagues at ICE, they've just started. They've just started this operation. So They're using internal resources and the capabilities that they have to apply to a new set of operational instructions, which means go after the worst of the worst. I think they're going to need time to scale up that activity. And I think you'll see the numbers increasing as we reduce activity in CBP at the border and remove those who enter illegally. That will free up more resources at ICE, including detention, to take more people into custody and put them on a path for removal, and essentially have those ops scaled up. We saw what the Drug Enforcement Administration did in Colorado. The word is out. The Trump effect is in full-scale activity across the country in going after these vicious gang members like the Tren de Aragua, going after violent offenders in cities like Chicago and Denver and Los Angeles. And so I'm eager to see more of it, eager to participate in it, and continue to protect America in ways that we have not seen in the last administration.
I loved when ICE raided that invite-only party in Denver where they got weapons, cash, I mean, you name it, steroids, this pink cocaine. But how do we make sure that they don't come back in? We deport them, we put them on military planes, send them back to their homeland. Do you think some of them will have the gall and the nerve to try and come back in again?
Well, that's what criminals do. They take advantage of, weaknesses in enforcement and like sanctuary cities and things like that. And so now it's time to invest and sustain operations at the border. So operational control, increased infrastructure, increased agents on patrol, consequences for those who do elect to come in, and just more capability, more sensors, more access to the border. And things like the wall will help prevent future illegal entries. And then, the goal would be to sustain those operations over time to continue to, secure the border and protect America.
House Oversight Committee Chairman Jim Comer calling on 4 sanctuary city mayors to testify at an Oversight Committee hearing scheduled for February 11th. That would be Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, our very own Brandon Johnson, Denver Mayor Mike Johnston, and New York City Mayor Eric Adams. They're all, Adams being perhaps not really in that category anymore, but all of them are preside over sanctuary cities, and all of them have basically voiced opposition to cooperating with ICE in any meaningful way, not allowing local law enforcement to be constructive and so forth. What, if anything, would you like to see the Trump administration do to sanctuary city and state jurisdictions in terms of, basically punishment for not working constructively with federal law enforcement when almost in any other context, combating domestic or international terrorism or any other context, gangs dealing in drugs and gangs. The idea of federal law enforcement coming in and working with local is something that is universally supported, except here. And I wonder if, you were advising President Trump how you would suggest he deal with some of these bad actors in public offices.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing and what is going to happen is a continued pressure on these cities. I think in the law enforcement context and in cooperation with ICE, I think there's a situation where we ask, it seems that Mayor Adams has gone through a conversion. He wants these things addressed in his city. I think it'll happen in other places. So let's ask him to cooperate and then tell them what's going to happen if they don't cooperate, and then make them through the legal means by restricting grant monies from the Department of Justice or putting maybe laws in place. With the assistance of Congress, the president can make these cities and towns and these mayors end these destructive policies that don't allow them to cooperate with ICE. And so I think that between the Justice Department and the actual activity at ICE will be a benefit to end these destructive practices in order to keep us safe, in order to make these streets safe for our children and our futures.
Ron Vitiello is a former U.S. Border Patrol chief, deputy commissioner and director of ICE. He's the only person to have led both components of the Department of Homeland Security, ICE and CBP. Ron Vitiello, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate your time.
Glad to be with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Itching to swing that 9-iron but don't want to wait until the spring thaw? You're in luck because the Tinley Park Golf Show is here to help. Golfers of all ages and skill levels are invited to come out from January 31st to February 2nd